There comes a moment when you realize that constantly being the nice one is quietly breaking your spirit. You say yes when you're exhausted. You smile when you want to cry. You hold space for everyone else, while no one holds space for you. And deep down, a part of you wonders, why does it still hurt when I'm doing the right thing? The truth is, kindness without boundaries isn't kindness. It's self-abandonment. In the teachings of the Buddha, we are reminded that compassion begins with the self. Giving to others must come from a place of wholeness, not depletion. And sometimes, the most compassionate thing you can do is to say no. Today, we're going to talk about what it really means to stop being too nice, not from bitterness or ego, but from a place of deep respect for your inner peace. If what we explore here resonates with you, if it gives you clarity or relief, then all I ask is a simple favor. Just tap the subscribe button. That one free act helps us continue sharing this path with those who need it. And please don't skip a moment of this video, because what we're unpacking might be the very shift you've been seeking. This isn't about changing who you are, it's about returning to who you've always been, before the world told you that being quiet, agreeable, and endlessly available was your only worth. The Buddha's wisdom offers another way, one filled with balance, strength, and grace. Let's walk it together. There's a silent pressure that many people carry, this need to be liked, accepted, and seen as the good one. It starts early. We learn that being agreeable earns us praise, that being quiet keeps the peace, that putting others first makes us lovable. And so we mold ourselves into what others expect, helpful, kind, flexible, low maintenance. We say yes when we're tired. We apologize when we haven't done anything wrong. We soften our truth to avoid discomfort. And little by little we start to disappear. The more we give, the more people expect. And the more we're expected to give, the harder it becomes to say, I need space, or I can't do this right now. This isn't just people-pleasing, it's self-neglect disguised as compassion. And it's exhausting. The Buddha taught that suffering begins when we forget the middle path, the space between extremes. If you're constantly giving and never receiving, if you're always prioritizing others while ignoring your own inner world, that's not balance. That's imbalance masked as virtue. And what's worse, society often rewards this kind of quiet sacrifice. You get called kind, generous, easy to work with. But the truth is, no amount of external validation can soothe the ache of internal abandonment. You end up drained, resentful, and wondering why your relationships still feel one-sided, even when you're doing everything right. Buddhism offers us a radical but gentle truth. Compassion must include you. You are not here just to carry others. You are also here to rest, to heal, to receive, to be held. Think of the middle path like walking on a tightrope between two extremes, too much giving and too much withdrawal. The Buddha didn't teach us to shut down or close our hearts. He taught us to open them mindfully, to give with awareness, to help without losing ourselves in the process. When you're always the nice one, people learn how to take from you, but they rarely learn how to give to you. This isn't entirely their fault. When you constantly overextend, it trains others to expect that from you. The more you silence your needs, the more invisible they become to others. That's why the first step isn't teaching others, it's remembering yourself. Let's bring this closer to your own life. Think about a time when you said yes, even though every part of you was saying no. Maybe you stayed late at work to help a colleague, even when your body begged for rest. Maybe you agreed to something just to avoid disappointing someone you love. Maybe you've said it's fine when it wasn't fine at all. These little moments add up. They create a quiet resentment inside you, not because you don't care about others, but because you've stopped caring for yourself. Buddhism doesn't shame you for this. It meets you with awareness and invites you to see clearly. It teaches that clarity is the first step to liberation. So when you catch yourself saying yes out of guilt or fear, pause. Take a breath. Ask yourself, is this a kind act, or is it a survival response? There's a difference between generosity and people-pleasing. One nourishes you, the other empties you. The Buddha often spoke of wise action, doing what is skillful, what leads to less suffering, not more. And sometimes the wisest action is saying no. Not because you don't care, but because you do. You care enough to preserve your energy, to honor your peace, to be present in a way that's real and sustainable. This isn't selfish, it's sacred. Saying no isn't rejection, it's redirection. It's how you create room for your true self to breathe. The path to balance begins here, with truth, with courage, and with the gentle reminder that your needs matter too, not more than others, but just as much. There's a quiet ache that builds over time when you constantly silence your own needs just to keep others comfortable. At first, it doesn't seem like a big deal. You offer help even when you're tired. You agree even when your heart says no. You keep the peace even if it costs your own. But over weeks, months, or even years, that silence becomes heavy. It shows up as resentment, fatigue, and this growing distance between the life you're living and the one your soul truly wants. This is the moment when many people wake up and realize being too nice has turned into a habit of emotional self-erasure. Buddha taught that every action carries intention, and when our kindness is driven not by true compassion but by fear, fear of rejection, fear of conflict, fear of being misunderstood, it becomes a form of attachment. In fact, it's one of the most subtle attachments, the need to be liked, needed, or constantly approved of. And this craving, as Buddha warned, leads to suffering. The more you bend to fit into someone else's expectations, the more distant you become from your own essence. What began as generosity turns into a silent contract of self-sacrifice. Many of us were raised to believe that saying no is rude, or that prioritizing ourselves is selfish. But Buddhism offers a completely different view. It says that the middle way, the path Buddha walked and taught, is about balance. Not extreme giving, not extreme withdrawal, but a sacred equilibrium. And in this balance, your well-being is not only included, it's essential. You are not here just to carry everyone else. Your peace, your rest, your truth, they matter just as much. Think of it like this. If you keep pouring water into everyone's cup while your own runs dry, eventually you'll collapse, and no one can drink from an empty well. Buddha's teachings don't shame you for giving, but they remind you that wise giving is sustainable giving. True generosity flows best when it's rooted in self-awareness. Are you helping out of love or out of guilt? Are you agreeing because it feels right, or because you fear the discomfort of disagreement? When we begin to notice these subtle motivations, we step into deeper mindfulness. And here's something many people don't realize. Setting boundaries isn't about pushing people away. It's about inviting relationships that are rooted in mutual respect. When you say, "I can't do this right now," or "I need time for myself," you're not being cold, you're being clear. And clarity in Buddhist practice is a form of compassion, because when you're honest about your limits, others can trust your yes. Your kindness becomes real, not performative, not strained, but grounded and sincere. So many times we think, if I start saying no, people will stop liking me. But ask yourself this: do you really want to be liked for the version of you who never speaks their truth? Or would you rather be loved for your wholeness, even if that means fewer people but deeper bonds? Buddha reminded us that everything impermanent includes our relationships. And when you evolve into someone who honors themselves, it's natural that some connections will shift. But what remains, what grows in that space, is something far more nourishing. This journey isn't about becoming hard or distant. It's about becoming whole. And when you are whole, you give not out of obligation, but from overflow. You offer presence, not performance. You set boundaries not to block love, but to allow love to enter in a way that doesn't hurt you. The most powerful thing you can do is not to be endlessly nice. It's to be awake, aware, and aligned. That's what the Buddha walked toward, And that's what we are learning to walk toward too, one clear breath, one boundary, one brave no at a time. There's something incredibly difficult about recognizing that not everyone deserves full access to your time, your energy, or your heart. Especially when deep inside, you've been taught to believe that being good means always being available. For many of us, our earliest lessons around love and acceptance were tied to performance, being the easy one, the helpful one, the one who never causes conflict. So naturally, as adults, we carry this silent fear. If I set limits, will I still be loved? Will people still stay? That fear becomes the quiet reason we keep overgiving, even when it's slowly draining our joy. But Buddhism teaches us that anything born from fear cannot lead to peace. The Buddha reminds us that freedom begins when we stop clinging, whether to things, people, or even identities like the nice one. What's often misunderstood is that boundaries are not about shutting people out. They're about honoring the sacred space within you. That space where your energy lives, where your clarity is stored, and where your deepest truths are housed. Think of it like a temple. Would you let anyone walk in with muddy shoes? Would you leave the door wide open in a storm? No, you'd protect that space with care and intention. So why is it so hard to protect our inner temple the same way? Often it's because we feel guilty. We confuse saying no with being unkind. But true kindness, as Buddha taught, is rooted in wisdom. Without wisdom, even the most generous act can lead to suffering. Let's be real. Some people only love the version of you that doesn't challenge them. The version of you that always agrees, always shows up, always gives more than they do. And the moment you start honoring your boundaries, they may pull away. That can hurt, but it also reveals something powerful. Who was truly respecting you, and who was simply benefiting from your silence. In Buddhist terms, this is the unveiling of attachment. When we begin to let go of our need to be liked at all costs, we begin to see clearly. We're no longer performing, we're simply being. Now, this doesn't mean we stop being kind. In fact, it's the opposite. It means we start offering kindness that's real, not performative, not draining, but conscious, grounded, thoughtful. Just like the Buddha taught through the practice of wise effort, you don't pour your water into a cracked bowl. You give where it can nourish. You love where it can grow. And you speak when your words come from peace, not pressure. Saying yes all the time doesn't make you compassionate, it makes you exhausted. True compassion includes yourself. There's also the matter of silence. Sometimes the most powerful boundary you can set isn't a confrontation, it's absence. Detachment doesn't always come with an announcement. You don't have to explain your worth. You don't have to prove why you're pulling away. In Buddhism, silence is sacred. It's not empty, it's full of awareness. When you withdraw from what no longer honors your spirit, you make room for what does. And in that silence, something beautiful happens. You come back to yourself. Let's talk about forgiveness too. Because as you set boundaries, guilt might visit. Old voices may whisper, you're being selfish, you're disappointing people. But the Buddha taught that liberation lies beyond guilt and fear. Forgiveness isn't just for others, it's for you. Forgive yourself for the times you betrayed your needs to keep the peace. Forgive the version of you that didn't yet know how to say no. That version was doing the best they could. And now, you know better. Now you can pause, you can breathe, and you can choose differently. Boundaries are not the end of love, they are the beginning of conscious love. Love that sees, love that respects, love that gives without self-erasure. When you say, this is what I need to feel safe, you're not being difficult, you're being awake, and that's what Buddhism asks of us, to wake up, to stay present, to love without losing ourselves, because you are not here to be everything to everyone. You are here to be fully, gently, unapologetically you, and that is more than enough. There's a certain quiet sadness that creeps in when you realize you've been giving so much of yourself, and yet feeling unseen, unheard, and unappreciated. You keep showing up for others, even when your energy is low. You put everyone else's needs ahead of your own, believing that this is what makes you a good person. But over time, that giving turns into something else: resentment, exhaustion, and a sense that you're slowly disappearing. The Buddha warned us about this imbalance. In his teachings, he emphasized that compassion without wisdom can lead to suffering. True compassion must include yourself, and that means protecting your time, your peace, and your emotional well-being. The fourth truth we must face on this journey is that we cannot keep betraying ourselves in the name of being kind. You don't owe anyone access to your energy simply because they ask for it. Being helpful does not mean being a doormat, and saying no does not make you unkind. This is where we must begin to understand the difference between genuine compassion and compulsive people-pleasing. Buddhism teaches us to walk the middle way, the path between extremes. If you're constantly giving but never receiving, constantly bending but never resting, you're no longer walking that balanced path. You're falling into an extreme of self-neglect. One of the most dangerous habits we develop when we're too nice is self-abandonment. We override our own needs just to maintain peace or avoid discomfort. But the Buddha didn't teach avoidance. He taught presence. He taught us to face what is, even when it's difficult. So if a relationship drains you, if a situation disrespects your boundaries, you are not being asked to smile and stay silent. You are being asked to wake up, to see clearly, to respond from awareness, not fear. That is the beginning of true wisdom. Let's be honest, part of the reason we keep overextending ourselves is because we fear what will happen if we stop. Will they still like me if I say no? Will they think I'm selfish if I set a boundary? But the Buddha reminded us that fear is one of the greatest causes of suffering. It distorts reality and leads us into patterns that harm us. You are not here to please everyone. You are not here to make yourself small so that others can feel comfortable. You are here to awaken. And part of awakening is recognizing when you are giving from guilt rather than from love. When you begin to honor yourself, truly honor yourself, you'll notice something extraordinary. You'll stop chasing approval. You'll stop seeking validation from people who never truly saw you in the first place. And you'll begin to attract the kind of relationships where you are valued for your authenticity, not your compliance. Buddhism teaches us that everything is impermanent, including the identities we cling to. If you've spent your life being the nice one, it's okay to let that version of you dissolve. You're allowed to become someone who speaks their truth with love, who protects their energy without apology, who honors their heart without guilt. There's a beautiful freedom in learning to say no, not from anger, but from clarity. Saying no doesn't push others away. It simply invites the right people to come closer, the ones who respect your boundaries and love you not for what you do for them, but for who you are. And this is what the Buddha meant when he said that peace comes from within. It doesn't come from being agreeable. It doesn't come from making everyone else happy. It comes from alignment, from living a life that is true to your spirit. Sometimes the greatest discomfort doesn't come from how others treat us. It comes from betraying ourselves just to be accepted. You might recognize this. The way your heart sinks when you agree to something you don't want to do, just to avoid disappointing someone. Or that tired smile you force when you're expected to be nice, even though you're mentally and emotionally exhausted. Deep down, we all want to be seen as kind, good, and generous. But at what cost? The Buddha's teaching of the middle way gently reminds us not to live in extremes, not in overgiving, and not in withholding, but in balance. And yet, too many of us have been taught that goodness means self-sacrifice, that peace means staying quiet, that love means giving endlessly. Buddhism calls this clinging to the idea of being liked, accepted, or approved of. But clinging always leads to suffering, always. In Buddhism, there's a powerful teaching about the concept of upaya, or skillful means. This refers to making wise, compassionate choices, depending on what the situation calls for. It's not about always saying yes or always saying no, but being mindful of your intention and your inner state. Let's say someone constantly leans on you for emotional support. You listen, you help, you're always there. But now it's becoming overwhelming. You're starting to dread their messages. You don't sleep well. You avoid your own responsibilities. This isn't compassion anymore. It's depletion. And the Buddha didn't teach us to be martyrs. He taught us to live with wisdom. Wisdom means recognizing that your energy is not infinite, that your peace matters, that giving from an empty cup serves no one. Here's what's even more subtle but deeply important. Sometimes we overextend ourselves not just out of love, but out of fear. Fear of being rejected, fear of being seen as selfish, fear of conflict. That's where true suffering begins, because we are no longer giving from love, we are giving from fear. And Buddhism invites us to examine this fear, not to judge it, but to understand it, to sit with it in meditation, to ask, what am I really afraid will happen if I say no? Will they stop loving me? Will they think I'm rude? Will I be alone? These are real questions, but they have peaceful answers if you're willing to stay present with the discomfort and not run from it. The Buddha often taught that to understand suffering is the beginning of freedom. So if your suffering comes from being too nice, from constantly crossing your own boundaries just to keep others comfortable, then that is your path to awakening. That discomfort is a signal, not a failure. It means your soul is ready to grow. It means you are ready to stop sacrificing your joy to keep the peace. And here's something else worth remembering. Boundaries are not walls. They are bridges to healthier, more honest relationships. When you start honoring your limits, you give others permission to do the same. You become a mirror for authenticity. You stop playing roles and you start being real. Buddhist practice at its core is about awakening to truth, awakening to your own needs, awakening to the patterns that keep you stuck. And the moment you say, I love you, but I also love myself, something shifts inside. You begin to realize that being kind doesn't mean being available all the time, that you can say no without being cruel, that your worth isn't measured by how much you endure. As the Buddha said, you yourself, as much as anybody in the entire universe, deserve your love and affection. That's not just a nice quote, it's a call to action. A reminder that you can be loving and still protect your peace. That you can walk away from what drains you and still wish others well. You were not born to be a constant yes in a world that forgets to ask how you're truly feeling. The Buddha taught us that peace begins the moment we choose ourselves without guilt. So if today's words touch something deep within you, let that be your turning point. Watch one of the suggested videos now to continue this path of awakening and strength. And from the bottom of my heart, thank you for being a part of this Buddhist journey. May you walk forward with clarity, courage, and compassion.